On this Diesel Insights, we're going to do a turbo shootout. This is going to be a deep dive. This is a turbo test on an LBZ. So what we're going to do is test our stock turbocharger against our STR, our Mach 1, and our Mach 2.
Fight.
We got 3 tests we're going to run these chargers on. Spool up test, power test, and tow test. And our goal here is to really characterize where each turbocharger does well, where each turbocharger does not so well, does poorly, what the compromises are. So under what circumstances do you want to choose a certain turbocharger for your application? My goal is after you watch this video, you should be able to really match the turbocharger to the application for the truck. The first test style we're going to compare against is spool up. So what we want to do is characterize the transient response. This is how I know who's going to click off the video early. Transient response of the turbocharger, that is the ability of the turbocharger to respond to your throttle input. So how quick does it take for that turbo to respond to your throttle input? Now this test is a little bit different than what you might be used to, so just give me a second here, I'm going to explain it. What we do is we use the engine dyno to hold the engine at steady state at 1500 RPM. And the engine dyno can increase the load or decrease the load depending on how much horsepower the engine's putting out, and it'll hold that engine at that steady RPM. Now obviously if you drop off the throttle, it's not going to hold the engine at that RPM, but if you stay at least 30 horsepower on the engine, it'll hold it at 1500 RPM. From there we floor the throttle, whack the throttle, and we count how many seconds it takes for the engine to go from making 30 horsepower up to 250 horsepower. What that's going to tell us is about how much time it takes the engine to go from 0 pounds of boost up to about 24 pounds of boost. This is a pretty consistent test, but in order to get really good data, we do it 10 times in a row. So on the screen in front of me, I have the spool up test data, and the first data set I want to talk about is the 1500 RPM data set. In the 1500 RPM data set, we were able to test the stock turbocharger, the STR, and the Mach 1. The Mach 2, being the 67 millimeter charger, was too big to spool up reliably and quickly at 1500 RPM. We'll talk about that one in the 1700 RPM data set. So for quick response at 1500, stock versus STR versus Mach 1. The quickest spooling turbocharger at 1500 RPM was the STR. And you can see that right here, 2.987 seconds on average. Now that's an average of 10 runs and then plotted. The Mach 1, 3.066 seconds. Very, very close behind the STR. The stock charger, 3.315 seconds. Again, these were all tested 10 times, and then that average time is plotted. Difference of about 10%, 9.9% slower than the STR. The important thing to remember here is it's very easy to make bold claims about spool up. Things spool up like stock, things spool up so quick. You'll hear it all over the internet as you shop for turbochargers. Very rarely do people actually test the spool up speed of a turbocharger, much less in a controlled environment like an engine dyno, against a brake, and in a statistically repeatable situation. My goal here is that when I tell you that the turbo spools up faster than stock, that it's backed by real data, which I have in front of me, and I can do it again if I have to. I think now's a great time to talk about this test in its origination. In 2011, I did a turbo shootout. There was no test available for testing spool up. Nothing in the SAE papers existed, so we basically wrote this test protocol. We've been using it since. It's since been adopted by others in the industry. It works. The important thing to remember here is that this is a consistent test, and it accurately characterizes how well the engine, power, and the turbocharger respond to your foot. Let's step up to the Mach 2. The Mach 2 is a little bit slower spooling turbocharger, and it's a turbo that appreciates a little bit higher RPM. So usually when a Mach 2 is sold, we recommend trans tuning. What this does is bump up the average operating RPM of the engine, gets you out of that 1500 RPM and below zone, and bumps you up towards 1700 RPM as kind of your floor for engine response. So at 1700 RPM, the spool up test measures the engine's ability to go from 40 horsepower to 250 horsepower. And that's roughly 0 pounds of boost up to about 19 pounds of boost. We need less boost at 1700 RPM to make the same 250 horsepower because we have extra engine speed to get there. Let's go over the data real quick. The STR, again, lightning quick, 2.23 seconds. The Mach 1, 2.49 seconds. The Mach 2, 2.568 seconds, and the stock turbo, the slowest at 1700 RPM, 2.778. Okay, so the stock turbo is still picking up from the back of the pack here. The entire lineup beating the stock turbocharger at 1700 RPM. Does that mean that the Mach 2 is always going to spool up faster than the stock turbo? No, not at 1500 RPM, nor would I recommend you test the Mach 2 to run that kind of power level at 1500 RPM.
At 1500 RPM, we couldn't get the Mach 2 to reliably make it to 24 PSI quickly. We could get to 22, 23 PSI, and if we use that data, it shows us about 3.8 seconds to spool up at 1500, or 15% slower than the stock turbo. So you see what a difference 200 RPM makes. Really, the Mach 2 appreciates transmission tuning and simply can't compete with the other turbochargers at 1500 RPM.
All this is to say that our lineup is designed to spool up very quickly. We want response. That's a big selling feature of our turbochargers, is engine response. We want the truck to respond when you ask it to. The next battery of tests is the power tests. So you're probably curious, how well do these turbochargers perform at peak power? Because let's face it, when you're shopping for a turbo, you know what kind of peak power you want out of the truck. Regardless of how it spools up or how it hauls a trailer, you want to make that peak power number. So let's just talk about what each turbo is capable of making peak power wise, so we can kind of get that out of the way. Remember, this engine is outfitted with a 10mm stroker pump and a set of 100% over injectors. All tuning was kept apples to apples. So basically the engine is air limited. It'll fuel harder as more air is available. It's kind of like what we call lambda limited. It's the same tune. Tuning was not changed to address for the turbocharger as we move across the board. As we're characterizing the power test, let me just tell you how they're run. So we're gonna run these on the engine dyno. We're gonna run a 12-second sweep from 1700 RPM to 3250 RPM. And then we're going to run backwards from 2400 RPM until the engine stalls around 1500 RPM. And we do that to try and get the best batch of data down low. We get that by pulling backwards. And then we get the really good characterization of power going forwards from 1700 RPM up. Along with the power numbers, I'm going to show you boost and lambda, and we'll just talk about that stuff a little as well. Okay, so a stock LBZ turbocharger, pushed to its maximum effort, makes about 536 horsepower on our engine dyno. That's backed by 1,260 foot-pounds of torque at 1,600 RPM. You'll see back here our maximum boost on the stock turbocharger was 39 PSI. That was at 2,000 RPM. That maximum boost number quickly tapers off though as RPM climbs. So at 3,000 RPM, at 2,800 RPM where the engine's making peak power, we're able to sustain about 32 pounds of boost. Lambda, about 1.15. These are fairly clean numbers. If you're looking at these numbers and you're thinking, these numbers seem low or they seem high, qualify that with lambda. So our goal here is to give you basically on the cusp of being smokeless. These are very clean numbers. This is not an engine puking smoke, being super hot, crazy EGTs, filthy nasty. This is a good clean running engine. Okay. So the first turbocharger to compare against the stock turbo is the STR. The goal of the STR is to compete aggressively with the stock turbocharger. We want to do that and allow that an engine with a small tune will also benefit power-wise from using an STR. So the STR picks up over the stock engine significantly, 615 horsepower up from 536 horsepower. That's a huge gain. That's actually a surprise to me. I was not expecting the STR to perform quite that well. I was expecting to see a power bump, but that is more than I thought. I think this is a serious value in power. Boost-wise, the STR still makes that same 38 pounds of boost at 2,000 RPM, and then carries that big boost number all the way out to 2,800 RPM, where it still makes 38 pounds of boost, 6 PSI more than the stock turbo at that same 2,800 RPM. Now keep in mind, to make that 615 horsepower up over the stock turbo, you're going to need fueling. So if you have a stock CP3 pump or stock injectors, you're not going to pick up this same 80 horsepower roughly. This horsepower is available if you have fuel to match. And again, lambda-wise, you can see this is actually cleaner power than the stock turbo. So at peak power, we're at 1.19 lambda, whereas the stock turbo was at 1.15. So this is a very clean power curve at 615 horsepower. If you want the visual representation, I'll pull you over here. The red line is the STR, STR power, STR torque, stock turbo power, stock turbo torque. Okay, moving on to the Mach 1. Mach 1 sees a peak of 45 pounds of boost at 2200 RPM. Peak power happens at 3000 RPM. That's 671 horsepower. So we're up pretty significantly, 56 horsepower over the STR. 40 pounds of boost at 3000 RPM. We're still running very clean, 1.14 lambda. And then compared to stock, we've got the Mach 1 in red and the stock turbo in black. The last comparison will be the Mach 2. So the Mach 2 peak horsepower, 743 horsepower. So we're up significantly again from the Mach 1. So as we march our way up here in turbocharger size, the Mach 2 being our largest turbo in the lineup, this turbo is capable of making more than enough power to injure the stock bottom end of your LBZ. You know, we recommend this power level on a built engine or something with a little more oomph behind it. To get to this 743 horsepower number, of course, you're going to have the fuel system. On this setup, we have the 10 millimeter pump and the 100% over injectors. So this thing's got plenty of fuel, it's got plenty of tuning, it is set up to rip. You remember the STR made about 79 horsepower over stock. The Mach 1 made 56 horsepower over the STR, and now the Mach 2 makes 72 horsepower up over the Mach 1. So we got a lot of power here, 743 horsepower. This is at 42 pounds of boost. This is, again, fairly clean. You might be thinking, that boost number doesn't seem that crazy. It's really not. If you keep drive pressure and boost in line, you don't need a lot of extra airflow. What you need is that extra airflow at higher RPM. So that little bit of extra boost and that little bit of higher operating range of the engine really allows the engine to stretch its legs and get there. That's where that 740 horsepower number comes from. So let's bring this home. We got the Mach 2 at the top of the series, which spools faster than stock at 1700 RPM and is capable of making 200 more horsepower than the stock turbocharger. That's enough data for most guys to make their buying decision. But if it's not, I have another data set for you that is very thick and rich and creamy. You're still with me? This might be the longest dump of your life, but you're gonna get some great turbocharger information. So here we go. The tow test is a test where we hold the engine at steady state at certain load and RPM values. So we might pick an RPM value like 1500 RPM, and we'll hold that engine steady state at a multitude of horsepower outputs, 100 horsepower, 150, 200, 250. You see where this is going. This is a long day on the dyno, and it burns a lot of fuel, and it's really hard on equipment, but it gives us a lot of really good information, and it tells us very clearly if our turbocharger is outperforming the turbocharger it's replacing. Be that a stock turbo, a competitor's turbo, one of the turbos lower in the line or higher in the line, or just another prototype we're testing. When I tell you that we have the data to support to say that our turbo is better than stock or better than other stuff out there, it's because I tested it. Here's how these histograms work. Basically, we have a title in front of us, exhaust pressure for instance, and then we have the RPM that the engine's operating and the horsepower output. So if you want to see how one turbo, stock in this case, on the left, stock LBZ, compares to the STR, compares to the Mach 1, compares to the Mach 2, that's how we go across the screen. This data is going to be published in a blog, so it exists out there in space. I would encourage you to go look through it if you'd like. What I look for is blobs of data that look good compared to other blobs of data. So the center of the graph, for instance. So I'm going to look at this whole data in the center and see how it compares to this whole data set in the center here. And that's going to really tell me, okay, in the mid-range or at mid RPM, mid power level, how does one turbo compare to the other? And so I look for the colors as they move across the screen. The green colors we try and characterize as good, and the red colors we characterize as getting towards bad. And we look for trends in that data. The data on this test is run out to 600 horsepower if we can. Not all the turbochargers can run to 600 horsepower, and nobody is really towing over 600 horsepower. You would have to be a total savage to do that, and we're not doing it. We don't have enough thermal cooling on any truck to do that. So here we are, limited to 600 horsepower. Factory runs out to about 550 horsepower, or 536 if you remember our earlier power test. First table I want to show you is just boost pressure. So trends in boost pressure. The first trend that steps out here is this area, and this is lower RPM and higher horsepower. So one of the things that a lot of guys like to do with their trucks is use those tunes while towing, and that is lean on the throttle when the truck's at lower RPM to use that extra torque, which is horsepower really at low RPM. The stock turbocharger kind of runs out of steam here. 38 pounds of boost, 37 pounds of boost at 2,000, 36 pounds of boost at 500 horsepower. You can see the STR gives you a little extra. We start with a stock turbocharger at 1750, 38 pounds of boost, and then we go up to 42 pounds of boost at 2,000 RPM, 42 pounds of boost at 2250, 42. So you can see at 550 horsepower, you have a longer usable line than the stock turbo. Now remember, the STR, we're not looking to set records. What we're looking to do is make a turbo that spools up quicker than stock and outperforms stock by a little bit. In this case, 79 horsepower peak at the flywheel, but also in the towing test, we're going to outperform it over here. Those similar trends in the 64 and then the 67 is going to easily make big boost numbers, especially at 600 horsepower. Drive to boost ratios. This is a good indicator of when the turbocharger is what we call upside down. That means that it has to use a lot of drive pressure to get the job done. So you're going to add a lot of exhaust energy to drive the turbo, but then you're not going to get as much boost return. So when you have high drive to boost numbers, that is over 1.5 approaching 2.0, that means that the turbo is really getting a workout. You're really hard on the thrust bearings. You're really kind of beating the thing up. And so the stock turbo, you can see really good clean drive to boost numbers here, under 350 horsepower and from 1500 to 2250. The STR also doing really well in that 2250 to 1500 up to and under 400 horsepower. There's a couple anomalous cells. What I'll tell you is that has to do with tuning handoff in the vane control. It's not anything to do with the turbocharger itself. If we ran those same vane positions, we'd get numbers that crossed over here. So focus again on kind of the block as a whole. And then as we get further into the power here, you can see as we get towards, say, 3,000 RPM, for instance, and 500 horsepower, you can see the STR beats the stock turbocharger on drive to boost by a pretty significant margin, over 10%. So 1.79 to 2.01, 1.57 to 1.82, 1.3. Yeah, you get the picture. As we go up towards the Mach 1 and the Mach 2, you can see the drive to boost numbers get better and better up top. The Mach 2 does give up some down low, so when the turbocharger is operating a little less efficiently, it's going to need more drive pressure to get the same kind of boost out of the wheel. You see that in the 67 or the Mach 2 as we get in that low RPM, low power output. We see a little more inefficiency out of the turbocharger. That's reflected in the drive to boost numbers being up over 1 in the upper left quadrant here. The Mach 1, less the story, so still pretty good STR-ish, I would say, drive to boost numbers in the upper left. And then in the bottom right, the Mach 1, a little bit better than the STR. The Mach 2 really starts to shine over the Mach 1 and the STR in the bottom right. So the bottom right would be high power, high load. This is just a report of vane position actual versus vane position desired. I put this in here so that folks who are tuning their trucks or folks who are running their trucks in these conditions can see what vane positions we saw, to see if they match your operating conditions, to see if the data that we saw should match what you're going to see. If you command different boost numbers or if you command different vane position numbers, of course you're going to get different outputs than we got. Mass airflow, lambda, and EGT. These things all go together. The more mass airflow you get, the higher the lambda, and lambda is smoke output, so low lambda is high smoke, low lambda is rich, high lambda is clean. What we want is higher lambda numbers. So when we see darker green numbers, that should indicate to you that we're seeing more smoke out of the truck. The smaller the turbo, usually the better smoke control you get down low. The bigger the turbo, the better smoke control you get up top. Mass airflow, again, the turbo's ability to make power, to control EGT is largely related to its mass airflow. So the more airflow we can get through the engine, the better EGT control we're going to have, the better the lambda control we're going to have, and basically the better the engine's going to operate in general. You can see that the stock turbo is limited in airflow, around that 550 horsepower number. Even seeing 590 grams per second is a lot out of a stock turbocharger. We were able to run the STR up past 600 grams per second, and that's just at 550 horsepower, so we ran higher than that in our power test. And then you can see the Mach 1 and the Mach 2 putting out 650-ish grams per second in these tow tests. And again, this isn't even max power, this is just in the tow test. So you're running, 70, 80 more grams per second out of these bigger turbochargers towing. That's at high outputs. You can see the limit of the stock turbocharger here. We usually use lambda as a limit. We don't like to go much below that 1.15 number. As we approach 1.10, we usually axe the test. 1.10 is getting fairly rich, fairly dirty. You can see there's still quite a bit left on the STR. 1.26, we could go heavier than that. 1.25, we could definitely go heavier than that. The factory charger was at that 1.15, 1.12. In the same, for the Mach 1, we're not even remotely dirty here at 550 horsepower. 1.37, 1.39, this is extremely clean. Still very clean at 600 horsepower. Same with the Mach 2, similar type stuff. You can see the upper left here. The stock turbo at 1500 RPM is the cleanest operating charger under heavy load. The STR is slightly behind it here. And the Mach 1, same kind of deal. The Mach 2 can't quite get to these 250, 300 horsepower at 1500 RPM. So we are going to be limited on that Mach 2 in that really upper left-hand quadrant. EGT. This is a big question we get from customers frequently. How does your Stealth Turbo handle EGT? Well, the goal of this graph here is to show you where, if you pick a load in RPM, what EGT you can expect and how it compares to stock. Now, the thing to remember here is that these tests were run sometimes sequentially to each other. So you might have an EGT starting of 1,000, and then Dan will hold the engine again, and the EGT will kind of build. So you might see one cell build on another. And a good example of this would be here at 1500 RPM. You can see these two cells build on each other. You can see this is a building cell, and then Dan started again at 1046 and built up. So I will call this data yellow. Use it in larger swaths. Don't look at one individual cell to another. You have to look in context. In general here, if you look at this data in general from 1750 to 2500 and from 200 horsepower, let's just say up to 400 horsepower on the stock turbo. This is really great kind of towing area here. You can kind of average these in your head, and then against the STR, same deal. There are areas where they're the same. There's areas where they drop 100 degrees. For the most part, the STR is going to handle EGT as good or better than the stock turbocharger in the majority of towing areas. As we get towards peak power, what you're going to see is the stock turbo has a tendency to get into that heavier orange and into the red in the bottom right-hand corner. So as RPM goes up and power load really goes up, EGT is going to really climb on the stock turbo. On the STR, you can see that that STR turbo really holds on to EGT, makes better use of the fuel, especially under that heavier load. So let's say 2500 RPM, for instance, at 500 horsepower, 1128 on the STR, 1220 on the stock turbo. Stock turbo wasn't able to make 550 horsepower, but goes to 1550 degrees. If you go to 2750 RPM, 550 horse, 1440 on the STR. So to see an EGT drop of 100, 150 degrees under high load with the STR is a fairly common report from our customer. That's a fairly easy report to back up here on the engine dyno. What we see as we go to the Mach 1 is that those EGT numbers continue to drop as you go into the high RPM, high load areas, but they do come up a little bit as you're in the lower RPM and lower load areas. So those bigger chargers, they have a little bit of a harder time controlling EGTs at low RPM. That's natural. Really, these EGTs are not anything out of bounds. 1160 degrees is not anywhere near the abort temperature. So as a driver, as a person watching EGTs, none of this would be any concern to let out of the truck or to change gears or make any adjustments to your driving style. Simply, you might see 100 to 50 to 100 to 150 degrees hotter on a Mach 1 or a Mach 2 while towing in those low RPM areas, whereas the STR is going to beat stock, or the OEM charger is going to be a little stronger than the Mach 1 and Mach 2 in the lower areas. As we go to those really high output areas, Mach 1, Mach 2 is really going to shine in the EGT department. Okay, so that's the tow test. Again, this data is in PDF format, so if you want to look through it yourself and check it out and see how it all compares, it's yours to do. Reminder, this data takes a lot of time to put together, to collect, to collate. It is raw data. It's not manicured data. Some of it is, some of it's imperfect. So, respect what you get, appreciate what you get. We're doing our best here to put good data together and make, educated product design decisions and consultation decisions for our customers based on this data. So hopefully you appreciated this presentation. I certainly appreciate going through and collecting this data and analyzing it and making design and engineering decisions based on it. We've been building turbochargers and doing tuning for a long time here at Calibrated Power. It is our passion. We really thrive on building good products and providing great service to our customers. Give us a call, 815-568-7920. If you want to comment on this video, tell me how awesome we did. Yeah, please do that. Or if you have questions about the video, feel free to comment below. Of course, I'd love to answer those. Or if you have any other video requests, yeah, feel free to add those.